Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sabrina, and today I want to talk about how victims usually end up becoming the same person as their perpetrators. As someone who wasn't raised by the best people growing up, I realized that I have toxic patterns in my life which I inherited or learned from people that raised me, and that's something that's always affected my personal relationships, whether that's friendship or my relationship with my family members or in my friendships. And through my journey of self realization and healing, there are a few points that I really want to warn people about becoming a perpetrator from a place of victim mindset. So let's start from the very beginning. And trigger warning, because there will be a lot of sensitive topics that are mentioned. If you feel like you're going to be triggered, please click off right now. Okay, let's begin. So, when I was a kid, I was on the receiving end of a lot of very heinous actions done to me by a lot of the adults around me, and that includes my biological parent and step parent. A little bit of background about me. I moved to the United States with one of my parents when I was 9 years old, and at that time I didn't have any other relatives that lived here, and I also didn't have any distant relatives that lived here. I only knew my one parent, and that parent was married to my step parent, so I lived with both of them. And the abuse I had to endure started when I was around 12, and it started with a lot of yelling and screaming and a lot of blames that were put onto me for very small things. Like, I would get verbally abused for getting things wrong, like 3 plus 4, or accidentally forgetting to write my name on my homework, small stuff like that. And then eventually it escalated to a point where it became physical, and that was done to me by my step parent. And I, every single day, I had to live in a lot of fear, because in my day-to-day life I had to endure a lot of yelling, screaming, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and withholding of food until I start doing what they told me to do. And there were a lot of signs of neglect because I wasn't fed the best food growing up. I had to eat a lot of random things like ketchup with rice, basically, even though the step parent can afford to buy much better food, much healthier food. So what happened is I had to live in constant doubt, fear, and a scarcity mindset, because I don't know when's the next time I'll be fed better. And that puts me into a constant state of doubt, fear, and scarcity mindset. And that leads to my example number one. Whenever I would go out to eat with friends, when we order something that we everyone would share together, I would always have the constant doubt and fear in the back of my head that my friends are just going to take all of the food without me knowing, and I won't have enough for myself, or I have to kind of fight for the food. And because of that, sometimes I would catch myself just grabbing the food and putting them in my own plate when no one else has moved their fork yet. And that is something that I slowly had to unlearn. And I had to realize that my friends are not what my parents are like at home at all. Another thing I realized is that when I was rushing to put food on my own plate, it would also make other people around me nervous, and they will also start rushing to grab food and put it in their own plate. So it's like my fear and worry that I won't have my share of the food is causing other people to also panic and do the same. And if I don't stop and calm down for a moment and just chill out, then I will start perpetuating this cycle where everyone kind of have a scarcity mindset or some kind of subconscious fear about not being able to get their share of the food. And that was one of the very first few times where I feel like I really brought the bad habits that were instilled in me at home out into the world. And that's something that affected my friends. And that was also one of the first few things that I really recognized within myself that I really had to change. That was a relatively tame example, so now let's take it up a notch. So my step-parent, when I was younger, the way my step-parent would resolve any conflict, whether that conflict was a big issue or a small issue, it would always end in some kind of violence, whether that's my step parent punching a hole through the door, or that's them punching the wall until it breaks, or that's the step parent throwing something across the room, or that's the step parent, trigger warning, grabbing my hair and pulling me, trying to drag me down the stairs. It will always just end in something violent. This is something that I realized much later, but when my step parent does that, it subconsciously taught me and ingrained in me that the only way to truly resolve a conflict, whether that's big or small, is to make sure that it ends in violence. While I'm absolutely not physically violent towards other people, what that did do to me is that whenever there's a conflict, whether that's big or small, it always ended up in my emotional outbursts. Because that was honestly the only way that I knew how to end any kind of conflict at all. To me, subconsciously, it just felt like if it didn't end up in me having some kind of emotional outburst and having the other person acknowledge what they did wrong to me in the middle of my outburst, then the conflict just wasn't resolved. And I just always had to blow an issue up, and I needed to resolve the conflict in the middle of a huge blow up for my mind to justify it as okay, now this issue is resolved. Obviously, that was a very toxic pattern that I shouldn't really need to put anyone through, because that's never really the right way to resolve any issues. At the same time, I was just so unaware, because to blow up an issue and then to resolve it later was the only way I knew how conflicts worked. And I didn't know that there was a more normal way to resolve things. And I also didn't know how other families resolve their issue and what is the proper way to do that. That unawareness is also oftentimes how victims end up becoming the perpetrators, because the toxic way of doing things is the only way the victims were ever taught how to do things. So of course they're going to emulate the only thing that they ever known. Especially with things like conflict resolution, because when two people resolve things privately, usually that's not really shown or broadcasted to anyone else. So it's also hard to see an example in our daily life of how to properly resolve issues. While that's not an excuse to not learn the right ways to do things, I'm just giving a perspective on what it's like for someone who is toxic, who someone who never seen the right way of doing things, how we can fall into a toxic cycle because we just never seen a good example. Sometimes when I do look at good examples, it doesn't always emotionally stick to me. It doesn't always stand out to me as, okay, this is the way that I need to resolve things. Okay, I need to learn from this person because the way I've been doing things is not good compared to that person. Because a traumatized mind will always end up gravitating towards the toxic way of doing things, because that's what feels familiar to us, because that's what feels like home to us. And this is just another example of how the victim can unknowingly become the perpetrator. And I hope everyone that's watching this understands that this is by no means an excuse for anything. It is to just help you recognize and to give clarity on what it's like when someone is doing something toxic to you. Like what could be the cause of that and what it is that's going on in their own mind, in their own psyche. And please, if you're going through abuse of any kind, please seek help from friends, family, people around you, and to distance yourself from the abuser as fast as possible. And also do not justify any of their actions because just because you understand it. Please hold them accountable. if you can, because these people don't need any more understanding. They need accountability and to take responsibility for their own actions. Whatever happens, the cycle of toxic behavior has to stop. Whether that stops with you getting rid of your own toxic behaviors, or it starts with you getting yourself out of a toxic situation so that you won't have to be on the receiving end of that anymore. Another unfortunate thought pattern that occurs when someone's been a victim for so long is that these toxic, abusive, and bad behaviors become so normalized and so ingrained in their daily lives that they think it's okay for them to do it to other people because they've had to endure it for so long. I hope everyone that's watching this understands that this is by no means an excuse for anything. It is to just help you recognize and to give clarity on what it's like when someone is doing something toxic to you, like what could be the cause of that and what it is that's going on in their own mind, in their own psyche. And please, if you're going through abuse of any kind, please seek help from friends, family, people around you, and to distance yourself from the abuser as fast as possible. And also do not justify any of their actions because just because you understand it. Please hold them accountable if you can, because these people don't need any more understanding. They need accountability and to take responsibility for their own actions. Whatever happens, the cycle of toxic behavior has to stop. Whether that stops with you getting rid of your own toxic behaviors, or it starts with you getting yourself out of a toxic situation so that you won't have to be on the receiving end of that anymore. Another unfortunate thought pattern that occurs when someone's been a victim for so long is that these toxic, abusive, and bad behaviors become so normalized and so ingrained in their daily lives that they think it's okay for them to do it to other people because they've had to endure it for so long. This is something that's very sad but happens very often. And what happens is when a child has been abused for so long, once they grow up and they have some kind of control and power in their lives, they really, really want to seek that power back by tenfold. Because of what they went through when they were younger, they don't know how to go about it in the right way. And because they had so much pain inflicted onto them, they think now it is their right to inflict that pain onto others because that's the only form of gaining power that they witnessed when they were younger. Instead of gaining power by gaining control of their own emotions and actions and take steps to heal, their idea of gaining power is to inflict that same pain onto others because as a child, that's the highest form of power they've ever witnessed, is to have control over someone else's life. A lot of these people will go through their entire adult life subconsciously seeking that power because that's something that they lack so badly when they were a kid. It's like when you were broke your entire life and suddenly you have some money, you just want to keep gaining that money. You want that money to come in nonstop. It's like a black hole of appetite that will never be fulfilled. You have to keep feeding the demon. And another thing to note is that a lot of the times the abused victim, to them, the only way that they could have changed their lives when they were younger and to make everything better was to change the things around them, their environment, the people around them, stuff like that. And while that is true to the situation that they were in when they were younger, once they're adults, the responsibility is on them to not repeat the same toxic cycle pattern of behavior. A lot of them do end up growing into a victim mindset where the fault is always in the people around them and it's always in the environment around them, and the responsibility is never on them because that's not the case when they were younger. But now that the situation is different, they need to be able to recognize the current situation they're in and to make changes accordingly. And a lot of the times, people do choose to stay in toxic cycles of behavior because it is excruciatingly painful to heal from the painful childhood they had to go through, and to realize that even though no one was there to really help them when they were younger, they have to learn to fully be there for themselves now that they're older, and it is also their responsibility to not repeat that cycle. And a lot of the times, a lot of people choose to not heal, and they choose to avoid that part of themselves because it is a very painful process to grieve and recognize the love and care they never had. And as an adult, they have to learn and recognize that within themselves, and to learn to give themselves the love and care that they never had. And it is very, very, very hard to give yourself something that you've never seen before. So that's why a lot of the times people who were victims in their childhood end up becoming perpetrators because it is just easier to emulate what was shown to them throughout their entire life. And I sincerely hope everyone who were in that state recognizes that healing and to not become the same monster that inflicted pain upon you is absolutely worth it. It's worth every painful moment you'll ever go through. It is worth every trouble you'll ever go through. And it is worth every single tear you'll ever shed for yourself because you owe that sympathy to yourself. And that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope everyone who's on their healing journey can meet the right people to help them, and also know that everything and everyone you love loves you back tenfold. Bye.